please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV18 Budget Town Hall, where we continue to grapple with the budget, fine print, decode and analyze what Budget 2018 means for you, for the Indian economy and for the Indian markets. Let's get straight to the headlines. The top headline coming in from Finance Minister Arun Jaitley. Win some, lose some for India Inc. They didn't get what they wanted, but they did get a little bit of what was on their expectation list. The second big headline that's come in from Budget 2018 on CNBC TV18, the corporate tax cut has come in, but it's only come in for smaller companies with a revenue of 250 crores. Remember, last budget was 50 crores. That was extended to companies with a revenue of 250 crores. Import duty hikes to boost Make in India. This is perhaps one of those things that has gone unnoticed, but there's been a slew of customs duty hikes. The CBEC chairman telling CNBC TV18 that the government hopes to accrue about 6,000 crore rupees, but revenue is not the issue. Make in India is. The infra and pet is coming in from the budget, nearly 6 lakh crore rupees by way of outlay, but a lot of that is off budget, especially for items like railway and roads and highways. 3 lakh crore target for Mudra loans. That is the headline that is coming in from the budget. Of course, the Congress has criticized that, saying it is still not enough. We will, of course, continue to bring you more budget headlines on the program, but let's get straight to our panel of experts who join us now to decode what Budget 2018 means. Nanalal Kidwai and Ajay Singh join me here in our studio in Delhi, and joining us in Mumbai, Pawan Goenka of M&M, Ashok Wadhwa of Ambit, also with us, the former Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog, Arvind Panagaria joins us from New York. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw joins us now from Bangalore. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV18. Ashok Wadhwa, let me start by asking you, you're our budget editor. You've been sitting in with us through this marathon coverage of the budget. Ashok, the 5 letters that the market didn't want to hear, LTCG, it is a reality now. The markets seem to have weathered the storm very bravely and very well. What do you reckon that is the cause of? Because there was so much apprehension. Was it already priced in? Was it factored in? Had the government done its job well, testing the waters ahead of the budget? What do you make of it?
Well, I think a few things, Shireen. To begin with, I think market was expecting it, so it didn't come as a total surprise. Second, I think, having provided the grandfathering provision and ensuring that it did not have a retroactive effect, I think was seen very positive by the market. Remember, when we were first hearing the budget in the morning, we thought the law was effective literally tomorrow morning. The finance minister has made it effective April 1. So it is possible that you will still see some sell-off between tomorrow and March 31, where people will try and protect their gains between February the 1st and March the 31st, depending, of course, on how the market performs. And again, I would say let's not take today as the only day on which we want to test the real effect of capital gains. We do know that there were government institutions that were buying in the market today. Let's see how and what happens over the next few days. The only thing I would say is that the government must provide one assurance to FPIs and FIIs. Now that they will have to file a tax return in India because they're taxable, most people worry about the draconian effect of having to file tax returns in India. I would go out of my way to try and provide comfort that, over the last 2, 3, 4 years, the government and the tax administration has become relatively friendly in terms of tax compliance and dealing with taxpayers. And I think if that assurance is provided, this is one event that is behind us. No more speculation, no more uncertainty. Life will go on. If the market continues to perform the way it is, what does 10% of that gain mean?
I couldn't agree with you more. At least the speculation has ended. We now know the devil that we now have to deal with. But Ashok Wadhwa, on balance, do you think the budget has done enough to break the jinx that we've been stuck in when it comes to investments and also to stimulate growth? On that parameter, has the budget delivered?
Clearly the focus of the budget was a lot on farm, where it has done more than adequate. on infrastructure, whereas you rightly pointed out, there is really
Farmers associations are saying that's not what the farmers associations are saying, and we can argue about whether there are political motives there or not, but on balance the feeling is that, look, the promise made on the MSP is still a promise. They are yet to finalize the scheme. The modalities of it have not been worked out. So are we getting ahead of ourselves to say that the budget has addressed the pain felt by the agriculture sector?
I think the one thing we have to give to this finance minister, and we've seen this over 4 years, year after year, unlike in the past where we were big on vision and poor on implementation, I think this finance minister has shown his ability to walk the talk. If you look at the number of policy initiatives that they have announced, Shireen, over the last 3-4 years, and how many of them have fructified, I would say a very large percentage of them have fructified. So let's not test them with mistrust. Let's give them the benefit of doubt and say they will implement what they have said. And should that happen, I think there was enough and more in this budget for the farmer. I recognize that there is never enough, and farm and agriculture is always a matter of political debate. But I think there is enough and more in this budget for the farmer, and I would like to believe that the farmer, the infrastructure service provider, the infrastructure asset owner should all be delighted at the manner in which the government has allocated its attention and expenditure.
Okay, as the CBDT chairman just told me here, when I asked him that the salaried class says that they would have liked more from the budget, he said, well, dil mange more, and I guess that is the story and the sentiment that comes along every budget. But Nainalal Kidwai, let me ask you, your big takeaway from the budget would be what the finance minister has done as far as the SME sector is concerned, also the promise, which again we need to wait for the fine print on how to address the NPAs dealing with the SME sector.
Yeah. So I think the MSME sector, the definition of application for the tax relief from 30 to 25% up to the 250 crores is going to cover a very large number of MSMEs. So it is a positive, enabling them to retain some of their profits and plow it back into their business. And as we know, between demonetization and implementation of GST, this is a sector which has suffered. So the fact that they have got some relief here is, I think, very important. A second way they do get an advantage is the sectors of food processing, fisheries, the advantages that come.
The two funds that they've set up there. Yeah.
So that tends to be, again, MSME driven. So there is the possibility of companies in those sectors or the possibility of companies entering those sectors benefiting from that. So I think that is very welcome relief. How the NPA environment works in the NPAs, we still have to see, because ultimately...
Because the RBI will have a say, banks will have a say on that as well.
Exactly. Okay. And that implementation can only be indicated by government.
So what's your big headline for Budget 2018?
So my big headline would be good news on MSME. Until a little while ago, I was actually very cheerful about agricultural and rural looking good, and that driving growth, because demand from these sectors has driven growth for industry historically. But I'm a little puzzled by some of the math that was being explained to me on the MSP, that in fact it really doesn't go very far from what I've been told. And therefore, is it really going to put money in the hands of the farmer or the rural economy? And if it's not, then that multiplier effect in terms of consumption and demand for sectors that feed rural and agriculture would drop.
Okay, Arvind Panagaria, let me come to you, sir, the former Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog. I want to bring this to your notice, sir, because you've been writing a lot about this issue. What we've seen the government do this time around in the budget, sir, is hike customs duty, basic customs duty on almost 50 items, from fruits, vegetables, makeup, hair products. I mean, you name it, and customs duty has been hiked ostensibly to make in India. The CBEC chief admitting here on CNBC TV18 that, look, this is going to hurt in the short term. What the short term means, we don't know, but this is the government's way of ensuring that people will make in India. Right approach, wrong approach. Arvind Panagaria.
Well, Shireen, you know my line on this one. I mean, I greatly support the government. Nevertheless, on this particular issue, I think both in the short run and in the long run, it is going to hurt. Trade liberalization has been a very hard-fought reform, and I think we are going back on it, which I think is not a very welcome thing to have happened. In the end, we think that by raising the duties, we will increase the output of the import competing products, meaning, products that we produce at home, which are also imported. But it also has a detrimental impact on the other side, which is the exports. So on net, you don't come out winner. And in fact, what you're doing is to move the production structure towards the products in which we are costly producers and away from the ones...
Equivocally, Arvind Panagaria, you believe that this measure will hurt Make in India, not help it?
Well, I think so. I think so. Remember that, go back to the 1991, we used to have such high levels of protection. We undid that protection, and that really led to a huge expansion of trade, both exports and imports, of course. And it also led to the growth ultimately. I mean, this was one of the certainly important factors in the 8.3% growth that we experienced for 9 years between 2003-4 to 2011-12. And so this was, there is general consensus that, look, you need to be, particularly for the developing countries, you need to be open in the world markets. You need to get efficiency effects happening through competition. But if we really raise our tariffs, that's not good for the economy.
It's not good for the economy. Before I move to our other panelists, Mr. Panagaria, what to your mind would be the big headline? There's been, it's really in a sense been a report card of Modinomics that this budget has presented to us. And let's be clear, the context which it was presented in is crucial state elections and, of course, the upcoming general election. Within that, do you believe that the finance minister has been able to ably walk the tightrope?
Oh, absolutely. I think, for a pre-poll budget, this is probably the best budget you can ask for, because, it has no serious kind of, meaning the negative kind of populist measures. Virtually everything it has is what you should be doing in the long run. I mean, on trade side, I've already pointed out my reservations, but that is really the only one. But the one big item, actually, covering 500 million people for 5 lakh rupees, there I think, is a major improvement on the provision of health. That to me is a really wow kind of provision. I mean, we almost get pretty close to the universal coverage in health. So I think that to me is the biggest. But also, if you look at what they have done in the agriculture and rural economy area, generally everything they've done is what they should be doing: electricity, LPG, toilets, housing, rural roads. These are all things that we ought to be doing. They contribute towards the long-term growth. They also contribute towards improving the lives of the people in the short run, without actually going to town through expenditures. The prior one, we remember 2009 election, there was a huge loan forgiveness. None of that, virtually everything, a huge pay commission, the Narega had been expanded from 200 districts to 600 districts. So a lot of the things, which today are a bit of a drag on fisc, were done. But I think in this respect, the government has stayed on its course, general course that it has started for the last 3 to 4 years. It has also on fiscal, I think on the whole, deliver, because 3.5% it happened because, GST has been collected only for 11 months here. And as a result, the indirect taxes are falling short. Also, the nominal growth, of course, has fallen a little shorter than was originally assumed in the budgetary estimates. So, in the denominator, when you do fiscal deficit to GDP ratio, in the denominator, the figure is a little smaller. So that has also contributed to this deficit getting a little larger. But, the bigger point is that...
fiscal consolidation, yeah. They've stuck to the roadmap, and of course they got that exit clause from the NK Singh committee, and they have now accepted the recommendations of the NK Singh committee. I'll come back to Dr. Panagaria in just a second, but let me go across to Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw with the point that you made. Kiran, I think, Mr. Panagaria echoing what a lot of people felt when the finance minister presented his budget speech and he spoke about that National Health Protection Scheme. It had a wow factor. Is this the Modi Care version of Obamacare? Now, the question is, how will the math work out? If you look at the allocation, and we've had the finance secretary explain that to us, that at this point in time, they have only allocated 2,000 crore rupees for it. Eventually, they believe that it could cost them between 8 and 10,000 crores. Now, the former finance minister says that this is woefully inadequate for a scheme that hopes to address 10 crore families. On balance, after having the fine print, Kiran, what do you make of it?
No, I don't agree with the former finance minister. I think 8 to 10,000 crores is a fair estimate of the premium that will be required to cover 100 families. We've seen that work in many of these insurance-backed schemes at the state level. The 2,000 crores is just a small allocation because, as explained by the finance ministry, I think they have basically said that it is not going to be rolled out till later next fiscal, that is in the FY19 fiscal. They believe that it's going to take at least 6 months to basically agree and get the structure right, whether it's going to be insurance-based or whether it's going to be a trust fund-based allocation. So I think this they have to decide very fast. Then they believe that there's going to be a tendering process if there is a premium-based, insurance-based scheme, which means that you are only going to see the scheme roll out towards the latter half of the next fiscal. And that is why I think they have actually allocated a small sum of 2,000 crores, but they believe that because of the increased cess, which is going to raise about 11,000 crores, they believe, in the health and education cess of 4%, they believe that they can adequately cover what they estimate is between 5,000 to 8,000 crores. So I think I agree with them that this is not only something they can afford, but they must afford, because this is game changing. If you cannot have inclusive economic development without health coverage, and this universal health care is welcome news, long overdue, and I'm really, really pleased that the government has finally made this bold move. So I, for one,
if this is a game-changing idea,
implementation.
Implementation
yeah, but it's
issues.
an implementation challenge.
Yeah, it is an implementation challenge. But if this is your number one game-changing idea from Budget 2018, what would be the second?
Well, I think, the second one is definitely about investing and upping its investment in science and research. I was very keen on hearing that kind of a signal from the government. I'm glad that they've actually allocated 1 lakh crores for what they call revitalizing research institutions. And they've also allocated 3,000 crores for, advanced technologies in what they call cyberspace, digital, artificial intelligence, vagera, vagera. So I think that's an important signal that the government is sending, because again, I believe that if you want to, have non-linear growth, you've got to invest in science and technology. We have woefully underinvested, like the economic survey report did point out. And to me, that's very welcome news to me as well. Except, again, I worry about how this huge amount of allocation is going to be basically used.
No, you're absolutely right. So the finance minister there talking about revamping the education system, moving from the chalkboard to the digital board era, but it boils down again to execution. Let me get the two infrastructure gentlemen on the panel now, Vinay Chatterjee and Ajay Singh. Ajay Singh, there was a point in time today when the market seemed to be very excited about your stock, and it was up by almost 10%. I don't know if that had to do with the fact that the finance minister said that people will do 10 billion trips or a billion trips. Sorry, a billion trips over the next few years. What was it in the budget from an infrastructure point of view? Airport upgradation, capacity enhancement, that was a big theme through the course of the budget. The Minister of State for Civil Aviation telling us that they intend to move on a fast-track footing with things like the Jaipur airport and follow the NHAI model for airport modernization. What does it mean?
I think one of the biggest issues that we have in aviation today is airport capacity. India is the fastest growing aviation market in the world. We are growing about 20%. You've seen the condition of airports. Mumbai is completely choked. Delhi is close to being completely choked. Airports like Chennai are very quickly getting there. Calcutta is getting there. So we need to create a huge amount of capacity. And I love the fact that this government is ambitious enough to look at big numbers.
Yeah.
Today we have about 100 million trips. We have capacity for about 200 million trips if you take all the airports. And to say that we will create enough capacity for 1 billion trips is an incredible statement. But of course it will depend on execution, but this clearly...
Because Jansen was talking about changing the OMDAs, that's one. Two, taking a leaf out of the NHAI book and saying that, look, we'll recycle the AAI assets similar to what the NHAI has done. Do you believe that that is now viable for the sector? Because this PPP business has been stuck for things like the Jaipur airport.
So if PPP didn't work as well as anticipated, they have to find new models. But the airport infrastructure has to come in if India has to continue to grow and become an aviation superpower. I think they spoke of Udan. It's been one of the signature schemes of this government. The fact that you have 56 airports which had never been utilized, which will come into play. 16 airports have already started. So it's been an incredible success. SpiceJet was one of the first airlines which got into the scheme and is the largest player in the scheme. He spoke of seaplanes and how useful they could be for tourism. He spoke of tourism itself. I mean, we have abysmal, 10 million tourists visiting India, which is really, and so to speak
10 iconic tourist
destinations, to look at 100 monuments, all those indicate that the government is thinking along the right lines, and this is stuff which will create both tourists, foreign capital into India, as well as jobs. Tourism is one of the largest employers. Low-hanging fruit. It needs to be done. It's always needed to be done. And it's great that this government is thinking about it.
Okay, let me go across to Pawan Goenka in Mumbai. Mr. Goenka, from a farm perspective, from a manufacturing perspective, I know you can put on both those caps and tell us, has budget in 2018 delivered on the expectations?
So I think, as you mentioned in the beginning, that Make in India was somewhat hidden inside many things. And there is quite a bit about Make in India in this budget. The increase in import duty, though Dr. Panagaria disagrees that this will have an impact on Make in India, but I guess in the short term, what the government is expecting is it's going to produce more local manufacturing. Whether it does or not, time will tell, but it's a fairly significant increase in cost of importing. There is allocation for National Manufacturing Competitive Council. There is things on jobs and skill development. There is things on smart city, IT and electronics, hardware development. So a lot of things are built in for Make in India, though there is nothing which is large by itself that's going to make a huge difference immediately. But generally positive direction for Make in India. The big thing, of course, the big story that we've been talking about whole day is the farm. The budget clearly is the budget that has focused in a very big way.
Do you feel confident of being able to sell more tractors on the back of what we've heard from the Finance Minister, Mr. Goenka?
Say that again, please.
Do you feel confident of being able, M&M being able to sell more tractors on the back of everything that we've heard around the rural sector from the Finance Minister?
Well, definitely yes. I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty hearing you. Hello.
Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
Hello.
Mr. Goenka, I was asking you about the farm sector, but maybe we'll try and fix that audio and then come back to you. Vinayak Chatterjee, you've had time now to decode the budget. You've listened in to what the secretaries had to say to us. On balance, does the fine print justify the sentiment that we've seen, which has been fairly positive and fairly confident of being able to get back to the growth path?
Look, it's addressed even after reading the fine print. If you step back and see the wood and not the trees, it's come to grips with two realities. The first reality is agrarian distress. The second reality is that this is the last operating year before a general election. These are the two clear realities which this budget has sought to address. Everything else kind of falls around these two large pillars. On agrarian distress, I don't want to get into the details, but it is one budget where I've seen a huge degree of granularity on pushing projects at the village, rural district level. Historically, most of our infra projects were top-down.
Yeah.
Bharatmala, Sagarmala, Udan, Uday, they were pushed down from the center. This is one attempt where you're pushing bottoms-up infrastructure projects at a very granular level. It has its problems. The road from New Delhi to Panchayat, as we know, has a lot of transmission loss.
Yeah.
But that's the reality of this budget, and I would, for infrastructure, I would say that this is very clearly a disaggregated rural infra budget.
Okay.
On the other hand, not a single new mega project has been announced in this budget. No Sagarmalas, Bharatmalas, etc. And a very clear message to the audience by the finance minister. He took great pains to say that they're on top of the situation to see timely completion, execution, and to say that the Prime Minister himself monitors project execution to the Pragati platform, etc. So my broad take is, these were the two realities. Comprising public growth through public expenditure in infrastructure, 21% increase in the overall allocations by about 1 lakh crore. So that story stays intact without any new item numbers. And on agrarian distress, a huge degree of grassroots, bottoms-up rural infra projects.
I'm going to get all of you to do my job for me. Let me start by asking you, Ajay Singh, if you were to give a headline to the budget tomorrow morning, what would it be?
I think it's an ambitious, optimistic budget.
Ambitious, optimistic budget. Okay.
I think, I think the big deal really is this whole healthcare. If they can get it right, the largest healthcare scheme in the world will be a game changer. There's no doubt about it. And the second one, of course, would be the Nab-Nirman for our sector. 5x of airport capacity. Today we have 125 airports in the country. Imagine that going up to 700. It would be a revolution.
Headline, Nainalal Kidwai.
I think there's an eye to jobs. I say that because
eye to jobs. Okay.
Because
I'm looking at the print headline.
MSMEs, tourism and focus therein, which is very job intensive, and clearly the desire to also look at the venture capital space in order to encourage monies going into entrepreneurship.
Where we still need more clarity on the new regulatory architecture that the finance minister said that they would talk about in a few days from now.
And I would just add some clarification, I hope, on how fair market value is constructed, because that's proving quite a pain in terms of
for the startups. We are going to have to take a break. Ajay Singh, Nainalal Kidwai, appreciate you joining us here. We'll come back with our guests Ashok Wadhwa, Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, Arvind Panagaria, Pawan Goenka and Vinayak Chatterjee. We'll decode what the markets will make of Budget 2018. All of that and more when we return. Welcome back. You're watching our comprehensive budget coverage here on CNBC TV18. We've got a star lineup with us. Pawan Goenka, let me come to you, sir, because there's been a lot of emphasis on whether this budget has delivered on the promise of growth, especially for the rural economy. There's been a significant outlay. As somebody who tracks that sector very closely, what's the sense that you get, sir?
Well, there is no doubt that there was a very urgent need for doing something for agri-economy and for rural economy. But there is a bit of misnomer of connecting it to tractor sales because India has 13 crore land holdings and only 60 lakh of those people buy tractors. So that's a very small percentage of people. What was under distress was more of small and marginal farmers, farmers that have less than 5 acres of land. And that's where what has been done will have the biggest impact. And that's going to have impact on consumer goods, on electronics, on sort of discretionary purchases. Tractors and stuff are tools of the trade. And in fact, we have had very good growth this whole year. And this will not directly have an impact on tractor purchase, but of course, positive rural sentiment is always good for anything that, any business that is prominently dependent on
CapEx, Mr. Goenka? Do you believe that we are now going to see an uptick as far as private CapEx is concerned?
No, I don't think there's anything directly in the budget that's going to have impact on positive capex. I'd said that before also, that even now the capacity utilization in India is of the order of 72-73%. Until we reach that 80% level, we will not see much of a capex on capacity. And therefore, we still have to wait for a year, 2 years of growth to reach that level, capacity-induced capex. Capex in new projects coming from infrastructure, depending on how much private partnership happens in infrastructure, could bring in a lot of investment from there. And we still wait to see whether the hybrid scheme that has been tried for road construction, for infrastructure development, will get sort of expanded. And that's certainly going to help in private investment. But not, I don't think right now too much in manufacturing is going to happen till we reach 80% use of capacity. But obviously, what has been done will hopefully increase.
Right, will hopefully change sentiment. But Ashok Wadhwa, from a market's perspective, you know, especially when we talk about the rush of money coming to domestic mutual funds, while the LTCG may be a short-term negative, it may sour the sentiment a tad, but from a valuations perspective, from an earnings perspective, what is the expectation now?
You know, I think if you look at the third quarter earnings as they get announced, you are seeing for the first time corporate earning going into double digit. We think the fourth quarter will follow suit. Overall, the financial year will still be a single-digit corporate earnings. So the market continues to be relatively expensive, trading at 24 times 2019 earnings. But the good news is that almost everybody is consistently of the view that there is an uptake both in demand and in corporate earnings. And therefore, economies perhaps moving into a gear where we can happily accept that 18-19 could show double-digit corporate earnings. And should that take place, I think there is enough and more momentum supported by liquidity, both globally as well as locally, to continue believing that the market is and will continue to touch new highs. There is no black swan event that I can think of at this point of time. And you know, clearly general elections are at least 10 to 12 months away. I'd therefore like to believe that despite the long-term capital gains tax, and despite the fact that mutual funds will now have to pay both tax on distribution and redemptions, I'd like to believe that the flow of money into the whole financial intermediation will continue to be aggressive and positive, which effectively means that between the corporate earnings on one side, positive sentiment on the other side, and liquidity right in the center, you will continue seeing a positive and bullish market.
So one-line headline from you, Ashok, before I let you go.
I would say bold and inclusive.
Bold and inclusive. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, I want a headline from you as well.
Well, I think, you know, very strong signals of wanting to do things which should have been done, I guess, a couple of, you know, fiscals ago. I think it's a better late than never signaling, which is, of course, a very strong pre-poll signaling. I think implementation is key as far as I'm concerned. Very, very positive budget otherwise.
Very, very positive budget. Vinayak, I'll give you the final say.
You know, a large portion of this budget refers to off-budget financing. And in fact, with each passing year, a larger and larger portion of the revenue raise is alluded to across the FM speech on off-budget financing. But the point we made to the Finance Secretary in your program a little earlier in the day is that I think as citizens, as viewers, we would want more transparency now on the off-budget sources of financing. And I think the budget speech and the documents don't dwell sufficiently on
Headline.
that. Headline, a budget that recognizes the two current realities. Agrarian distress, pump priming the economy through infrastructure, continued infrastructure spend.
Okay, Pawan Goenka, Ashok Wadhwa, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw and Vinayak Chatterjee, appreciate you joining us here on the CNBC TV18 Budget Town Hall. We'll take a break, but don't go anywhere. We've got a star lineup coming up on CNBC TV18, Decoding Budget 2018. Welcome back. You're watching our continuing coverage here on CNBC TV18 as we decode the budget. The biggest voices here. Joining us now is Adi Godrej. Mr. Godrej, appreciate you joining us here on the program, sir. The mood in India Inc. is largely positive. They believe that the finance minister has delivered on the promise of growth and the promise of inclusion as well. What do you make of the announcements that we've seen on the corporate tax front? Because I know that you were hoping for a cut in the headline corporate tax rate.
But the rural initiatives are good ones. If properly implemented, it will help the economy. The rural economy needs a boost. I think implementation is very important. And I think it will do both consumer goods companies and agri companies a lot of good if these provisions are well implemented. What was disappointing is that the corporate tax rates were not reduced as promised in a budget a few years ago. The reduction was only done for companies under 250 crores in turnover, which means only small and tiny companies. So India will not remain competitive. Our corporate tax rates are very high. US, UK have reduced rates this year. We are not competitive, and competitiveness is very important. So I wish he had stuck to his promise made a few years ago to reduce the corporate tax rates.
Okay, so you're disappointed with the fact that there was no corporate tax cut for large companies like yours, and you believe that will hurt us. It will diminish our competitiveness. But on the rural schemes that you talked about, and you said if implemented properly, it could have an impact both on demand as well as consumption. What's the expectation there, Mr. Godrej?
If well implemented, these policies could help both consumer products demand growth and agri products demand growth. So we see benefits for companies like Godrej Consumer Products, for Godrej Agrovet, and I think they're good provisions, but they must be implemented well.
Okay, so you believe that it will work well both for consumption and demand and for specific companies like yours. Mr. Godrej, appreciate you joining us with your quick reaction here on CNBC TV18. Let me go across to Mohandas Pai, also joins us now. Mohan, appreciate you joining us here. Disappointed with the fact that the long list of expectations that the startup ecosystem had from the finance minister largely unmet.
See, the budget is not very good for startup because nothing specifically has to be done to them. What the government of India and the finance minister needs to understand is young people who get into startups and founders, they're not sophisticated in managing the finances. They're not used to tax officers walking into the room. They're first-time entrepreneurs largely. They're not used to consultants. They're not used to all the way large enterprises put up with tax terrorism and harassment. The angel tax has not gone down well. Angel financing has come down. And despite what finance minister says about the law, the actual practice by the income tax officers has not been very good. We got so many cases where the income tax officers refuse to apply the law. They refuse to listen to them. They do what they want. And then once you get into appeal, it takes 15 years for the appeal to come. Then they demand 20% money. Where is the money for these people to pay? It is a real harassment. And if you want entrepreneurship to flourish, the government has to address it. And this is for the young people who are making our future. This is very important. They're as important as farmers. Yes, farmers are important, people who vote are important, but entrepreneurship is important. And if you don't do that, it's going to be difficult. So I think it has been disappointing, even though the finance minister said we'll have a special tax regime. I wish it spells it out and discuss the people as was done earlier.
Okay, so you're saying disappointment there in the startup ecosystem, and that angel tax, as you had pointed out and we had pointed out, was causing a lot of confusion and consternation, but that hasn't been addressed. But Mohandas Pai, on the mandate of job creation, whether it's the infrastructure boost, it's the rural schemes, has the budget delivered on the mandate of job creation?
See, this budget has done a very important thing for which I think we must compliment the finance minister and the government. That is, they have said for new jobs across all industries, for the first 3 years, they'll pay the 12% contribution, probably up to a limit for new employees. This is very good. It's the first time that the large-scale incentive for job creation is done. And for women, they cut down the contribution for the first 3 years to 8%, but women get more take-home pay. We have been asking for that. I think this is very, very good, and that will apply across enterprises. Plus 80JJA, where they said we're going to give a 30% additional deduction for salaries of new employees, which is very, very good. You have seen that impact on team lease, I think, where their tax rate came down from 34% to 5%. So I think that's very good, because jobs will come One, when there is growth, which growth is now happening, this year will be a very good year. Jobs will come in private investment. Yes, private investment is beginning to happen. There will be a good year. And three, jobs will come when possibly incentivize jobs and not labor. But the bigger issue is the government has not reduced the tax rate from 30% to 25% for large enterprises, because large enterprises produce very good high-quality jobs. We need high-quality jobs. We don't need jobs only for contract labor. And for that, it should have reduced it and taken the risk, because I think it's a very important to reduce cost of equity, cost of capital for large enterprises to compete, because after Trump reduced the tax rate by 40% to 21%, cost of capital for corporate America has come down. They're pouring money all around the world. They'll come and take over our companies and will not be able to compete. And many big companies may be owned by overseas investors unless you reduce the cost of capital and level the field. So I think for employment, a lot has been done. Whatever could be done has been done, and I would compliment them.
All right, Mohandas Pai, thanks very much for decoding the budget and joining us here on CNBC TV18. Appreciate your time. We are going to have to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. Deepak Parikh, Chanda Kochar, Rathin Roy, Moody's, S&P, and of course the former Secretary of Economic Affairs, Shakti Kanta Das, all join us to make sense of the budget and what it means for India. Stay tuned to CNBC TV18.